The Universal monster movies are the gold standard for horror. They tend to be slow burns that get under your skin with dark visuals and no gore whatsoever. 1932's The Mummy is by far my favorite, although its flaws seem to have inspired the movie's three remakes to run in wildly different directions. As the Brits loot their dying empire, some explorers in Egypt discover a well-preserved mummy and a book of spells. They guess at why the man had been buried alive.
Maybe he got too gay with the Vestal Virgins in the temple.
Possibly.
An execution for treason, I suppose.
Sacrilege, more likely.
Ironically, all of their guesses turn out to be true. An intern accidentally brings the mummy to life, and 10 years later the mummy returns to trick the archaeologist into unearthing the woman he had died for, so that he can resurrect her as well. The mummy lacks the camp that makes most of the celebrated Universal monster movies memorable. There's no
I never drink. Why?
or
Friend, good.
or The Mummy himself has only one scene as a mummy, a decision that's reversed in all subsequent films. The 90s remake worked because they tossed out the entire genre, serving up Brendan Fraser as Indiana Jones 2.0. Universal's least action-packed monster movie became the basis for action films that barely qualify as horror. And it wasn't a terrible idea. The Brendan Fraser movies are a kick to watch. Who doesn't love pygmy mummies with blow darts or yetis who kick field goals? Traditionally, most Universal monster movies have a pretty clear Freudian message to deliver. The Invisible Man does the stuff that we would do if nobody could see us. The Phantom of the Opera, the Creature from the Black Lagoon, and the Hunchback of Notre Dame are alienated, lonely men frustrated because they feel that love is outside of their grasp. The Wolfman is trying to restrain the rage within all of us. Frankenstein's monster is an innocent confused by society. In Dracula and Phantom of the Opera, the tension comes from the heroine's desire to be seduced, rather than the monster's desire to be accepted. Which is why those movies get away with the monster being an awful person. The Mummy is somewhat in that same camp. Imhotep, the mummy, is a guy trying to live out his ideal forbidden romance with the very willing priestess Ankh-Sunamun. Back in Egypt, he had violated sacred norms by sleeping with her, and then when she was executed, stole a sacred text to reanimate her. In an edited-out montage, he tried again and again through history to revive their love. And now, thanks maybe to destiny, he's got one last shot, using her original corpse and the soul of this Egyptian heiress, Helen Grosvenor. Now that in itself does not sound very relatable, but you could boil it down from each character's perspective. A woman is inexplicably attracted to an exotic man who promises to connect her to her homeland, despite her desire to marry up within the colonial elite. Or, a young scientist owes his career to a mysterious older man, but his benefactor plans to take away the hero's new love interest.
Why, I've never felt so alive before.
Or, a weary traveler just wants to get back together with his ex, but local customs are against it. More than any other Universal monster movie, The Mummy shows its roots in German Expressionism, thanks to director Karl Freund, who was cinematographer on projects like Metropolis and Faust, the kind of visual nightmare fuel produced when Germany was a complete madhouse of inflation, xenophobia, and depression that eventually led to the election of Adolf Hitler. The first and third acts of the film are full of dynamic, shadowy shots that fit well alongside Expressionist masterpieces. The second act, unfortunately, feels much like a stage play with several dull drawing room sequences. These are happily interrupted by an extended flashback as Imhotep and Miss Grosvenor stare into a magical well. It recalls the German silent film The Golem, which Karl Freund had also been cinematographer on, where a Jewish sorcerer presents the history of his people to the Czech emperor through a magical montage. Just as in Dracula, which survives mostly on Bela Lugosi's over-the-top performance, the rest of The Mummy's second act is made vibrant only by the energy of Boris Karloff, who has never been better, and his co-star Zita Johann. Karloff, of course, is one of the great icons of horror, and unlike, say, Christopher Lee or Robert Englund, managed not to be typecast in one role for his career. Johann is really a remarkable presence. She only has a handful of film credits, the most notable being this and The Sin of Nora Moran. Nora Moran is a great movie about justice miscarried, most remembered perhaps for its voluptuous poster, which bears very little resemblance to the slender Zita Johann. But Johann's intensity in The Mummy matches Karloff's with wild eyes and a clear intelligence trying to fight through the fog of thousands of years of memory, many of which may not be her own. Johann had a fascinating stage career in the States, which included a stint with Orson Welles and directing George Bernard Shaw's Don Juan in Hell, which is an excerpt sort of from Man and Superman in 1962. But perhaps the most surprising career is that of Karl Freund himself. His credits in Germany are a roster of the greatest Expressionist films ever: Metropolis, The Golem, The Last Laugh, and then he made some of the finest American horror films: Dracula, The Mummy, Mad Love, and crime films like Key Largo and The Thin Man Goes Home. Back in Germany, he invented the unchained camera, basically the first Steadicam, where he wore a huge camera around his neck to startling effect for movies like The Last Laugh. And then, in the steadiest business decision he ever made, this Third Reich-fleeing high-art genius took a job from Desilu, you know, Desi Arnaz and Lucille Ball, and he invented the modern way of shooting sitcoms. The lighting, the cameras, you name it. That's right, the guy behind Metropolis and Dracula also created I Love Lucy, and his influence has trickled down for decades, and not just for movie nerds like me. It's a funny world. Sometimes it's smaller than we think.